Last episode, we witnessed a great material rupture. The earth opened down to its dark, hidden depths for diamonds in 1867 and gold in 1870. The global economic machine arrived from the coast to turn ancestral soil into a cold corporate ledger. In 1899, the material pressure reached a critical threshold. Armed conflict tore the interior apart. Kingdoms collapsed. Families were displaced. The old structures of armed resistance were systematically dismantled. But what actually survived when the public structures changed? While the British Empire finalized its terrestrial infrastructure to look downward into the earth for wealth, the cosmic grid executed a non-local, spatial response. The century of extraction was met by the century of consecration. By the end of this episode, you will understand the exact mathematical precision of the prophetic matrix. We will decode how a single vessel, drawn into migratory labor, displaced by war, and stripped of physical weapons, built an unbreakable, alternative system of sovereignty that the colonial state could neither capture nor comprehend. The 20th century opened under absolute administrative compression. Following the end of the Anglo-Boer War in 1902, the colonial machine consolidated its power. The native hut tax and the Glen Grey labor tax tightened like a cage around the African household, forcing men off their land and into the gears of industrial migration. If you are watching this video, you are not a casual observer. You are part of a specialized audience that has spent years connecting the dots across your own deep spiritual journey. Within the sacred meridian framework, the field appears patterned rather than random. Pay close attention to this specific transition, because at the 2-minute mark, we are uncovering the hidden code of the prophet's trajectory. When the cosmic grid prepares a vessel to dismantle a machine, it does not plant that vessel in a royal palace or out on a blood-soaked battlefield. It sends the vessel directly into the mouth of the machine itself. During these years of intense economic instability, a young Isaiah Shembe is drawn into the migrant labor cycle. He experiences tenant farming. He experiences travel, poverty, displacement, and intense observation. No public movement yet. No mountain. No church. Within the sacred meridian framework, this is the essential period of absolute structural discipline. Before you build a holy sanctuary, you must first experience the raw pressure of the cage. The field went quiet. The vessel was being tempered. In 1906, the external friction exploded into physical reality. The Bambatha Rebellion erupted in Natal, a desperate, fierce uprising against arbitrary colonial taxation and land dispossession. It was the final major armed resistance of the old world on the plains, and it was met with absolute, ruthless military capture. But look at the non-local synchronicity of the grid. In that exact same fateful window of 1906, right as the power of the physical spear was being conclusively broken by the colonial machine, Isaiah Shembe was baptized on the 22nd of July, 1906. Think about the geometry of this moment. The military option was closed. The external fortress had fallen. This overlap can be read as a symbolic transition from military sovereignty toward ritual sovereignty. The spear entered the deep river. The water washed away the reliance on physical weaponry and initiated an uncapturable spiritual jurisdiction. As the fires of Bambatha died down, the immortal flame of the consecration was lit. In 1910, the colonial administration achieved its ultimate political consolidation with the creation of the Union of South Africa. In 1913, they struck their most devastating material blow, the Native Land Act, legally dispossessing black people of 93% of their ancestral land, restricting independent movement, and locking the entire population into a permanent labor reserve. But watch the perfect mirroring of the cosmic response. At the exact same moment that the terrestrial state consolidated its legal cage, Shembe arrived in Natal. The movement formalized. Two opposing mountains appeared in the landscape. One was the legal mountain of the state, enforcing the Land Act to restrict physical movement. The other was the sacred mountain of Nhlangakazi, establishing a divine sanctuary of pilgrimage. Shembe did not engage in a standard political withdrawal. He engineered a profound spatial reconstruction. In the aftermath of the 1913 Land Act, access to land became increasingly restricted for black communities. The prophet bypassed the paradigm entirely. In 1914, through absolute strategic and divine alignment, he successfully purchased the very land that Ekuphakameni stands on today. Within the sacred meridian interpretation, this act becomes more than land acquisition. Nhlangakazi is understood as existing in symbolic mirror relationship to Giza, approximately 29 south and 29 north, not as imitation, but as inversion. In this reading, the movement was not reaching northward toward Egypt. It was remembering southward toward an older ancestral continuity. The pyramids become a stone reflection of a deeper, sacred memory, while the mountain remains living terrain, echoing traditions that associate the southern landscape with a primordial, sacred geography remembered as the land of the divine. He established Ekuphakameni, the elevated place. Through this structural locus, he anchored the Nazarite movement as a living archive. It became a place where displaced people could recover continuity outside the rhythms of extraction, maintaining alignment not through possession of territory alone, but through ritual, memory, pilgrimage. This was not a mere church. It was an independent, alternative jurisdiction. It was a space where the broken, displaced migrant laborer could step out of the colonial machine, strip off the clothes of the industrial compound, put on the white robes of ascension, and walk as a sovereign being under a celestial law. Now we enter the ultimate cosmic alignment, where the macro history of global empire collides directly with the prophetic timeline. Look at the year 1918. On the global stage, the material machine reached its absolute limit of self-destruction. World War I neared its cataclysmic end, having turned the fields of Europe into a massive slaughterhouse of mechanized warfare. Simultaneously, the devastating Spanish influenza epidemic swept across the globe, bringing millions to their deaths. History was breaking apart. The terrestrial structures were weeping. But look at the 31 degrees east meridian line. In 1914, as Europe descended into World War and the global machine reorganized itself around industrial destruction, Isaiah Shembe secured the land that would become Ekuphakameni. 4 years later, in that same atmosphere of global fracture, the first temple emerged. While the world concentrated its energy on mechanized survival, the prophet concentrated his energy on consecrated continuity. While the global empire used its technologies, industries, and administrative systems to intensify extraction, survival itself became a full-time occupation for ordinary people. When every hour is consumed by labor, movement, taxation, and endurance, there is little room left for inner development. Ekuphakameni became a deliberate interruption of that condition, a sanctuary where people could step outside the machinery of survival and recover spiritual alignment. And then, the universe signed its work. In that identical year of 1918, the great, catastrophic floods struck the coast of Natal. Rivers burst their banks, and the roaring ocean threatened to completely consume the infrastructure of the colonial port of Durban. Sacred memory and later historical recollections preserve accounts that Isaiah Shembe walked directly down to the roaring Durban beachfront during the floods. Accounts surrounding the event later circulated beyond the movement itself, including references that entered local public record. The record further preserves the detail that a white woman present at the scene urged that Shembe be called after previously, witnessing his authority over the waters during baptisms. The prophet raised his staff and commanded the massive, destructive ocean waves to fold back into themselves. This was not a mere performance of a miracle. It was a profound, cosmic demonstration of authority. The universe was showing that the vessel who carried the consecrated code held dominion over the very elements of the earth. The global machine could command armies, print taxes, and operate mines, but the prophet could command the ocean. And this helps explain why Shembe increasingly became a figure of scrutiny, investigation, and interrogation, not simply because he preached, but because growing numbers of people believed they were no longer only hearing about sacred power, they were witnessing it. And once authority appears outside approved structures, questions follow. Who authorizes this? Who governs this? Who verifies this? The interrogations that follow can not only be understood as theological, they were also questions of sovereignty. As the 20th century advanced into the 1920s and 1930s, the colonial administration grew increasingly terrified of independent African spiritual movements. Following the brutal state violence at Bolhoek in 1921 and growing concern around independent African religious authority, Isaiah Shembe himself came under formal questioning and investigation. The resulting records, including the later Fay transcripts, preserve one of the earliest sustained attempts to classify and interpret his movement through the language of administration. The political field tried to classify him, restrict him, and contain him, but they could not find the handles to lock him down. In 1935, a final material threshold was crossed. The global markets had collapsed under the weight of the Great Depression, and the industrial machine deepened its grip on labor. In that exact year of 1935, Isaiah Shembe departed from the physical plane. Historically, the founder had left, but interpretively, the architecture of survival was already complete, because sovereignty was never stored in the fragile vessel of a single physical body. It had already been woven into a collective transmission. The temple stood, the mountain remained, the code was immortalized. The 20th century tested the body of the nation. It built mines, it built laws, it built taxes, it built borders. And yet, the code survived. The machine extracted labor, but it could not extract meaning. It displaced people, but it could not displace alignment. It exhausted bodies, but it could not extinguish transmission. But survival is not enough, because every sacred movement eventually faces the same unavoidable threshold. The founder ages. The vessel departs. The generation changes. And then history asks its hardest question. How does a vessel disappear while the frequency remains? How does a movement survive after the voice goes silent? How does authority continue without becoming administration? How does transmission survive without becoming imitation? Next episode, we enter the most protected chamber of the Meridian, not the birth of sovereignty, not the defense of sovereignty, but the inheritance of sovereignty. We unlock the succession code, how a sacred frequency survives the death of its carrier, how ritual became continuity, how memory became architecture, and how a movement built to disappear became impossible to erase. I am the biological altar. If this journey into the hidden map of our true sovereignty resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and share this video with those who are ready to awaken.